Our next presenter is Pedro Leite. He's a postdoctoral researcher in the Wilcox Hydrological Lab at Texas A&M University. His research interests include how different land uses, vegetation covers, and soil ecosystem engineers affect the ecohydrology on dry lands. Pedro?
Hello, thank you very much for being here today. Can you hear me well? Really glad for this audience. To be honest, a bit nervous being one of the few Aggies here, so bear with me. Thanks for attending. And today I'll be talking a little bit about some of the work I did for my PhD at Texas A&M, the Wilcox Ecohydrology Lab. And most of the work I'll be talking today was carried out at the Texas A&M Research Station in Sonora, Texas, so west of here, a little bit drier. And this work is mainly focused on understanding how woody plant encroachment and mainly junipers alter the ecohydrology of dry lands, specifically in this western portion of the Edwards Plateau. And what we know from a lot of the studies in the literature is that woody plants can alter the hydrology a lot through increasing evapotranspiration rates. So we normally know that in a lot of areas, woody plants transpire more than grasses. So there's this idea that you get increased cover of woody plants, you have lower groundwater recharge. And that has been shown, in fact, for a lot of areas in more humid regions or where trees actually get access to groundwater recharge. For example, in Oklahoma, studies from Creosote showing that Juniper's virginiana, eastern red cedar, has a major impact on spring flow and groundwater recharge, and mainly through increasing evapotranspiration rates. But we're interested to know if a lot of this knowledge can actually be applicable to the Edwards Plateau, or specifically the more drier portion of the Edwards Plateau. So there's some evidence actually from the literature, some studies showing that there's not a strong correlation with increasing woody plant cover and groundwater recharge and spring flow. Actually, in fact, what we see here, this graph showing us groundwater recharge in all these watersheds here in the Edwards Plateau has actually increased since the 70s for these rivers, and that happened at the same time where juniper expansion occurred. So there are two main things playing here. One thing is that we know that a lot of these rangelands in the Edwards Plateau were severely degraded several decades ago, in part to overgrazing. And so the recovery of these soils once overgrazing declined might have contributed to increasing infiltration rates in these landscapes. So infiltration plays a big role here because we know that groundwater recharge happens really quickly in the Edwards Plateau with the karst geology. But there's this idea and this hypothesis that we have that actually juniper helped a lot with the recovery of these previously degraded soils. So actually we wanted to see how much of an effect these junipers had and the infiltration capacity and the water storage in the soil and bedrock. So on the first study, we looked at infiltration rates. And here we mainly compared infiltration rates under junipers of different sizes and with open areas, adjacent open areas. And we looked at trees of different sizes, since young saplings, 2 years old, all the way to mature 75-year-old juniper. This is all red-berry juniper, by the way, but we did some other studies with Ashe juniper and got similar results. What we found is that for all those size classes, we have dramatically higher, 3 to 5 times higher infiltration rates under the trees compared to open areas. And we can see here with some tracers as well that water penetrated to a deeper depth under the trees. So some support to that hypothesis that juniper is increasing or improving the infiltration rates in these landscapes. But we also wanted to look at the actual runoff that we get from real rainfall events. So we had these several runoff plots installed in paired plots comparing junipers and open areas adjacent to them. And we found here is that real runoff throughout like a year and a half of study was about 3 times slower under the juniper compared to the open areas. So about only 4% of the water budget for the juniper plots and about 13% for the adjacent open plots. And when we looked at soil moisture profiles to kind of understand the water budget in these areas, so these are just soil moisture profiles and near trees and away from trees, we found that doing some water budget calculations that the canopy cover got more water than it actually rained, while also the grass and bare soil cover got less water. So this is an indication that some of the runoff generated in the open areas has been captured by the trees. So they're kind of actually working as sinks for runoff. But then we're also interested in looking at how the trees might be affecting not only the soil, but the bedrock substrate. Because we know these soils are very shallow here, so to have an actual big impact on deep percolation in the soil, they must also be affecting the bedrock. So we went ahead and did some trenching profiles and some mots of juniper and oak and some adjacent areas that had been cleared of trees for the last 80 years. And we found some deeper weathering profiles under the trees. And actually the rock was way more porous as well, 24 to 44% more porous under the trees. So a lot of this weathering here is mechanical weathering, directly breaking down of the rock by the trees, but Brian might be able to confirm that, but we speculate that mycorrhizal might be playing a big role here as well. So like rock-eating fungi have been described for other areas, so they're kind of increasing or contributing to the increase of porosity in these bedrock. So even more important, like here, we're looking at permeability rate in these bedrock using borehole permeameters. And in this figure here, just showing how infiltration rate or the permeability is higher in the areas covered with juniper and oaks compared to open areas here. So now that we know that they actually have a big impact on the bedrock permeability, we're kind of interested in understanding the rock and soil water dynamics along a longer term kind of study. So we drilled a series of boreholes into this hill slope with mostly juniper cover in this case. And so the boreholes went down to all the way down to 10-meter deep, some of them. And we try to measure soil moisture. Soil is very shallow, so a lot of the moisture was held into the bedrock here. So we used like neutron probes over 3 years to measure the soil water and rock water storage in these profiles. So here in this middle figure, I'm just comparing the soil water storage between open areas and areas under juniper. And we didn't see a huge difference, but it was slightly higher in the open areas. It wasn't a very significant difference, but the main significant difference that we found was in the bedrock water storage. So in red here, I'm showing the water storage under the trees was substantially higher throughout most of those 3 years under the junipers. And we found that a lot of that water stored occurred during like these major storm events here, 100-millimeter storms. And that kind of carried over a period of 2.5 years at least. And here, so we see that during the drought of 2022, open areas and juniper end up having the same very low water storage. And this is an indication that water stored in the bedrock might last for several years until it actually gets used up by the trees. So what this kind of shows, it's what other studies are showing in other regions, is that not like rock moisture is a very important source of water for trees, but also that actually juniper and other trees, they might be improving the storage of this bedrock and capturing excess runoff, which actually benefits them and might be able to explain some of their success and resilience in colonizing and encroaching in these landscapes. And so just to kind of sum up, we believe that this shows some good evidence that juniper might have played an important role in recovering some of these previously degraded landscapes, but we're not necessarily saying that it's all good. We did this work in a drier area where trees don't have access to groundwater, and it is possible that in areas where they do, they might have a negative effect on springs and recharge. But we have to acknowledge and recognize their benefits that they brought about, like to the soil. And if we want to get rid of junipers, some of these areas might be advisable to do it in a way that you preserve the soil structure and the benefits. So with that, I'd like to thank my committee members, my advisor Brett Wilcox, collaborators here from UT Austin, Daniela Rempe, and my lab and sourcing funds, and thank you very much, and I'll be glad to take any questions. So the question was if in the second part of the experiment, if there was a difference in groundwater storage or in soil and rock moisture storage under different classes. So the answer is no. For that study, we had a catena of points along a hill slope, and those were mostly denser juniper and oak mott's, mainly juniper, ash juniper, but they had trees of multiple sizes, and we weren't able to drill directly inside of a mott because of the requirements for machinery, so we did a kind of like the edge. But yeah, there were trees of multiple sizes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yes. Just saying that, well, we didn't really look at evapotranspiration rates and how trees might be actually tapping into groundwater. We know that there's no groundwater accessible to those trees where we did that study. But yeah, there are some studies saying, not necessarily here in the Edwards Plateau, but in other regions, that when trees do have access to groundwater, they might transpire more than shallower rooted vegetation. So it's more like a speculation, I'd say, but yeah, kind of a caution that where we did our study, there's no access to groundwater. That's a great question. If there's actually, he's asking if there's actually the possibility that some of the weathered bedrock under the woody plants could reseal. Well, my understanding is that weathering is mostly kind of permanent, and it would take much longer or geological time to change that. I think there might be possibility of some of the carbonates reprecipitating and kind of sealing some of the fractures. Yeah, comparing this to grasslands or current grasslands, we could see actually there's very little evidence that that has been broken in the past. And some other studies that I didn't mention here, we're finding evidence that these were actually free of trees, these landscapes, for thousands of years at least in the past to recently. Oh, that's a great question. If the open areas were evaluated, if it was healthy soil or if it was degraded. So the answer is we randomly placed the plots, and they were mostly grass covered, and we did measure grass cover and bare soil in the plots. And the points that we measured the infiltration as well. And at least the research station where we worked in Sonora, Texas, that's considered a well-managed and not degraded landscape. Grazing, stocking rates are very low there. So, but it would probably be considered degraded if you look at a more humid area here where you have more grass cover. So I did have several bare soil and grass patches there as well. We kind of contrasted those, but yeah, I didn't show here. But normally the bare soil is the one that is generating most of the runoff. That's a great question. Yeah, I mentioned the rock-eating fungi. I came across that in the literature, but I didn't look up, and I'm not sure if there's any juniper associated with those. Maybe Brian would know how to reply. Yeah. Thank you. All right. All right, thank you.